I paid for my wife's school for 6 years. She divorced me at her graduation party, saying you're not on my level. So I walked away. Now she's begging. The moment Isabella handed me those divorce papers at her own graduation party, my world didn't just shatter, it imploded. Her biggest mistake wasn't leaving me, it was assuming I'd just sign them, like some obedient dog. She had no idea how spectacularly she was about to destroy everything she'd spent years planning. I'm Daniel, and this is how I went from sacrificing everything for my wife's dream to watching that same wife lose absolutely everything she thought she'd won. The graduation party was at this upscale downtown venue, the kind of place with valet parking and waiters in bow ties carrying trays of champagne. Everyone from her dental school class was there, families and significant others all celebrating. I'd bought a new suit, my first new clothes in probably 2 years, and I was genuinely excited. I truly thought she'd finally acknowledge everything I'd done, maybe even thank me in front of everyone for making her dream possible. 6 years earlier, Isabella got into dental school. I made a decision that felt noble then, but turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life. I told her to focus entirely on her studies, I'd handle everything else. Rent, bills, tuition, books, even her car payments and insurance. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week as an IT project manager, picking up every overtime shift, skipping lunches to save money, turning down promotions that required travel because I needed to be home for her. My friends started having game nights and weekend trips I couldn't join because I was always working or just too exhausted. Slowly, they stopped inviting me. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Once she graduated, once she started making that doctor's salary, we'd travel, buy a house, maybe start a family, and I'd finally get to breathe again. But around year 4, she started changing. She became distant, cold. She spent more time studying at her friend Chloe's apartment than at home. When I tried to talk to her, she'd snap, blaming the stress of school, saying I couldn't possibly understand the pressure. I believed her because I wanted to. I kept thinking, once graduation came, once the stress lifted, we'd get back to being us again. Instead, an hour into the party, she pulled me aside to an outdoor garden area. It was quieter there. I noticed her friends, Chloe and 2 others, watching us through the window with these weird smirks. Isabella handed me a manila envelope. Inside were complete divorce documents, already filled out, already notarized, just waiting for my signature. The world tilted sideways. I remember asking her what this was, like maybe it was some sick joke. But her face was cold and serious in a way I'd never seen. She told me she'd outgrown me, that she was a doctor now, and I was just an IT guy. Then she said the words burned into my brain forever, "You're not on my level anymore, Daniel. You should date someone more like-minded, someone in your own league." She said it so casually, like suggesting I try a different coffee shop. I could hear her friends giggling through the window. She actually expected me to sign right there, right then, at her graduation party. Probably so she could celebrate her freedom with her classmates the moment I walked out. But something inside me just snapped into clarity. I looked at her, standing there in her expensive dress that I'd paid for, holding her champagne glass, surrounded by the success my sacrifice had built. I told her I wasn't signing anything. Not tonight. Not without understanding what was really happening. And that she didn't get to write the ending to my story anymore. Her face went from confident to confused to angry in about 3 seconds. Apparently, she'd never considered I might say no. She started raising her voice about how I was being difficult and unreasonable, but I just walked away. I left the party, leaving her standing there with her unsigned divorce papers and her shocked friends staring through that window. The next morning, she showed up at our apartment without warning. She said she needed to grab some things and stay for a few days while she figured out her next move. She acted like this was perfectly reasonable, like she could hand me divorce papers one day and move back in the next. But I'd spent the whole night thinking, lying awake in our bed that suddenly felt too big. I'd realized something important: the lease was only in my name because her credit had been bad when we moved in. Legally, she had no right to be there anymore. I told her she could take her personal items, but she couldn't stay. This was my apartment now. She absolutely lost it, screaming about how I was being petty and cruel and vindictive. But she left. Deep down, she knew I was right, and she had no legal ground. In her rush, probably planning to crash at Chloe's and regroup, she forgot her laptop on the kitchen counter. That's when I found everything. 6 months of text messages with some guy named Julian, who she'd met at a dental conference. Messages talking about how she couldn't wait to be free, how I was just a stepping stone, how she'd played me perfectly, and I'd never even seen it coming. There were discussions about her secret bank account with over $30,000 that her parents had been sending her as emergency money throughout school, money she'd never mentioned to me once in 6 years. There were messages with her friends planning exactly how this graduation party confrontation would go. How quickly I'd sign because I was so predictable and passive. How they'd all go out dancing afterward to celebrate her new life without me dragging her down. I took photos of everything, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, printed physical copies, and called a divorce attorney first thing Monday morning. When I showed him what I'd found, he actually smiled. "Your wife isn't just leaving you, Daniel," he said. "She's been running a con, and we're about to blow it wide open." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a divorce anymore. This was about justice. I was going to make sure she understood exactly what happens when you treat someone's love like a business transaction. But I had no idea that the very next evening, someone would knock on my door with a plan that could have destroyed everything I was building. A plan that would show me just how far she was willing to go to win this war she'd started. The person at my door was Chloe, Isabella's best friend from dental school. She was wearing a tight dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination and carrying a bottle of wine that I knew cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She had this supposedly concerned look, telling me she was worried about me, that she knew I must be going through a hard time, and she'd found something of Isabella's in her car that she needed to return. But her eyes kept dropping to my lips and back up. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. Chloe had never once been nice to me in 6 years. She was the one who'd joked about my cheap clothes and suggested Isabella could do better. And now, suddenly, she was at my door playing concerned friend, like we'd been close this whole time. I let her in, curious to see where this was going. Call it curiosity, or maybe just exhaustion. She immediately started touching my arm while talking, leaning in way too close, complaining how hot it was, even though it was only about 60 degrees outside. She asked if I had anything cold to drink in this sultry voice that was absolutely ridiculous. She kept steering the conversation toward how lonely I must be, how Isabella had treated me so badly, and how I deserved so much better. How any woman would be lucky to have a guy like me, so dedicated, hardworking, and clearly attractive. That's when I noticed her phone, positioned on the coffee table, camera facing directly toward the couch where we sat. It clicked like a light switch in my brain. This wasn't a friendly visit, or even a legitimate seduction attempt. This was a setup. Isabella had sent her best friend to try to seduce me, or at least make it look like something inappropriate happened. She wanted evidence that I was the one who cheated, that I was the bad guy, justifying everything she'd done. I almost laughed at how stupid they thought I was, like I wouldn't notice a phone recording or wouldn't recognize the most obvious honey trap in history. I looked directly at her phone camera and said, loud and clear, that I appreciated her concern, but I wasn't interested in any kind of relationship or physical situation with her. I was focused on my divorce proceedings, and she should probably leave now before this got any more awkward. The look on Chloe's face was priceless. Pure panic mixed with embarrassment because she realized I'd figured out the whole plan. She had nothing to show for it except a recording of me politely rejecting her. She grabbed her phone and practically sprinted out of my apartment without another word, not even bothering to take that expensive bottle of wine. I immediately called my lawyer, telling him every detail of the attempted setup. He told me to document everything and be prepared, because if they were trying this hard to create false evidence, it meant they were desperate. And desperate people make big mistakes that we could use against them. 2 days later, I got a Facebook message from someone I barely knew, Sophia, another woman from Isabella's dental school class. I'd maybe talk to her twice at parties. She'd seem nice but quiet, definitely not part of Isabella's core friend group. She said she needed to meet with me, that it was important, and she couldn't say more over text because she didn't know who might see it. Normally, I would have ignored it, paranoid after the Chloe incident. But something about Sophia's message felt genuine, urgent in a way that was different from Chloe's obvious trap. We met at a coffee shop way across town, somewhere far from anyone we knew. One of those independent places with mismatched furniture and local art. The moment Sophia sat down, she started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, but quiet tears, like she'd been holding something in for too long and finally had permission to let it out. She told me she couldn't be part of this anymore, that what Isabella was doing was wrong, and she couldn't watch it happen without saying something. She'd been losing sleep for weeks. Then she handed me a flash drive that she said contained everything I needed to know. That night, I plugged it into my laptop, my hands actually shaking. I had no idea what I was about to find. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Screenshots of group chats going back months, with Isabella as the ringleader. Messages coaching Chloe on exactly how to seduce me and make it look natural, what to wear, what to say, how to position her phone for the best angle. There were voice memos of Isabella laughing about how easy it would be to manipulate the divorce in her favor, how judges always sided with women anyway, how I was too stupid and trusting to put up a real fight. Bank statements showed her parents sending her $2,000 a month for the past 3 years as an allowance she'd hidden from me. Money that was supposedly for emergencies, but she'd been stockpiling it for her escape plan. And most damning of all, text messages discussing how to fabricate evidence of me being controlling or harmful. Conversations about changing the locks while I was at work and claiming I'd done it to trap her. About saying I'd threatened her, even though I'd never raised my voice to her in 6 years. About having Julian pretend to be a neutral witness if needed. They planned every detail of not just leaving me, but destroying my reputation in the process. Sophia's message at the end of the flash drive said she'd watched Isabella become someone she didn't recognize anymore. Someone cruel and calculating who treated people like chess pieces. Who turned this divorce into a game where winning meant completely destroying me. Sophia felt I deserved to know the truth, even if it cost her her entire friend group and social circle. My lawyer looked at everything Sophia had given me, and his whole demeanor changed from professional confidence to something almost predatory. He'd gone from thinking we'd win to knowing we were going to absolutely demolish her in court. Because what we had wasn't just evidence of infidelity, but evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted manipulation of the legal system, which judges absolutely hate. He filed emergency motions, requested immediate hearings, and suddenly Isabella's perfect plan started crumbling faster than she could control, like watching a sandcastle get hit by a wave. I found out through mutual acquaintances that Julian had dumped her right after he found out about the divorce proceedings. Apparently, he'd only been interested in a successful dentist with money and stability, not a woman in the middle of a messy divorce who might come out of it with nothing. Without him backing her up, her whole fantasy future just disappeared like smoke. Her friends started distancing themselves one by one because Sophia had apparently sent them all copies of the same evidence she'd given me, showing them exactly how Isabella had been using them as pawns in her scheme, lying to them about what was happening. Suddenly, the support system she'd counted on just evaporated. Her parents called me out of the blue, which was absolutely surreal. They'd always treated me like I wasn't good enough for their daughter, like she was settling by being with some IT guy instead of a doctor or lawyer. They apologized for not seeing what was really happening. They'd been sending money because Isabella told them I was financially controlling her, that she needed an escape fund for her safety. They were horrified to learn she'd been lying about everything while living off both their money and mine. The divorce proceedings turned into a complete nightmare for her. Every lie she'd told was exposed in court documents, every manipulation tactic documented with screenshots and voice memos, every hidden asset discovered and catalogued by the forensic accountants my lawyer brought in. Meanwhile, Sophia and I had started talking more, meeting for coffee every week. What started as her feeling guilty about being part of Isabella's circle for so long turned into these long conversations about life and dreams and what we actually wanted from our futures. I realized I was talking to someone who actually listened, who cared about my answers, who treated me like an equal, instead of a stepping stone. 6 months after that graduation party confrontation, my divorce was finalized with terms that shocked everyone who knew about the case. I got the apartment, the car, 60% of our combined assets, including a portion of that secret account her parents had funded. And she got a reputation in her professional circles that followed her everywhere because word spreads fast in the dental community. Sophia and I started dating officially about a month after the divorce was final. Not because she was some rebound, but because somewhere in all that darkness, she'd been the one person who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost her everything. That kind of character is rare. It's the kind you build a life with. A year later, I proposed to Sophia at the same coffee shop where she'd handed me that flash drive. I got down on one knee right there between the mismatched chairs and local art. She said yes, crying the same quiet tears she'd cried that first day, except this time, they were happy ones, and she was smiling through them. We planned a small wedding, nothing fancy, just 50 people at a garden venue. The people who actually mattered to us and had supported us through everything. I thought maybe finally I could close this chapter and move forward into something better. But then my wedding day arrived, and I learned my ex-wife had one final play left. One last desperate attempt to rewrite the story and make herself the victim. And it was going to happen right in front of everyone I loved, in the most dramatic way possible. The wedding venue was a beautiful garden space with string lights everywhere and flowers Sophia had picked out herself. Exactly the kind of simple, elegant setup she'd dreamed about since she was a kid. We'd kept the guest list small, maybe 50 people total, just close friends and family who knew the whole story. The ceremony had been perfect. Sophia looked absolutely stunning in her dress, her hair done up with little flowers woven into it. When we said our vows, I actually meant every single word, unlike the first time I'd stood at an altar making promises I thought were forever. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without waiting for the other shoe to drop. We were about halfway through the reception, right after our first dance to some song Sophia had picked that made her cry happy tears, when I noticed some commotion near the entrance. Our venue coordinator, a professional woman we'd hired, was trying to physically block someone from coming in. My stomach dropped. I recognized that voice even before I saw her face, that particular pitch and tone I'd heard a million times before. Suddenly, I knew exactly what was about to happen. Isabella pushed past the coordinator and stumbled into the reception area, wearing what looked like a wrinkled cocktail dress that had definitely seen better days, something she'd probably worn to clubs back in dental school. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged like she'd been crying for hours. She was clearly not in any state to be crashing someone's wedding. The music stopped dead. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every single person in that garden turned to look at this woman who'd just burst into a private event uninvited. I felt Sophia's hand tighten around mine, but her face stayed completely calm, almost eerily composed, like she'd been mentally preparing for this exact possibility for weeks. Isabella's eyes locked onto mine with this desperate intensity. She started walking toward us, wobbling slightly in her heels on the grass. She was saying my name over and over, like it was some kind of magic word that would fix everything. Like if she just said it enough times, I'd remember who we used to be. She dropped to her knees right there in front of the head table where Sophia and I were sitting, dirt and grass staining that wrinkled dress. She started this rambling speech about how she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, how she'd thrown away the only man who ever really loved her, how we were meant to be together, and this wedding was wrong. All of this was wrong. I was making a terrible mistake. She kept saying she'd changed, that losing everything had made her realize what actually mattered, that Julian had been a mistake, her friends had been toxic influences, and she'd been blind. But now she could see clearly, and she was begging me to stop this, to call off the wedding, to come back to her and give her another chance to be the wife I deserved, the wife she should have been from the start. The entire room was frozen in this awful silence, watching this scene unfold like it was some reality TV show or dramatic movie. I could see some of Sophia's relatives looking uncomfortable, probably wondering what kind of drama they'd walked into. Part of me actually felt sorry for her in that moment. She'd lost absolutely everything. Her relationship with Julian had crashed and burned. Her friend group had abandoned her after the truth came out. Her reputation in the dental community was destroyed because word had spread about the divorce details and the attempted fraud. Apparently, she'd been struggling to build a patient base because nobody wanted a dentist known for being manipulative and dishonest. But then I remembered that graduation party, remembered her cold eyes when she'd handed me those divorce papers. I remembered every single text message on that flash drive where she'd laughed about playing me and called me stupid and predictable. Any sympathy I might have felt just evaporated like water on hot pavement. I stood up slowly, walked around the table while everyone watched, and looked down at her, still kneeling on the ground with mascara running down her face. I said one word. Just one single word that contained everything I needed to say. I said, no. Not no with an explanation or justification. Not no with anger or emotion or even satisfaction. Just a simple, calm no that made it absolutely clear there was nothing she could say or do that would change my answer. That this chapter was closed and locked, and she wasn't getting back in. No matter how much she cried or begged, she started crying harder, reaching for my hands with her own shaking ones, saying she'd do anything, she'd go to therapy, she'd make it up to me, she'd spend the rest of her life proving she'd changed and become a better person. But I just stepped back and nodded to our security guy. We'd hired him specifically because Sophia had worried something exactly like this might happen. He was this big, professional bouncer type, probably 6 feet 4 inches, built like he could carry a car. He came over and very gently but firmly helped Isabella to her feet and started guiding her toward the exit while she was still crying and calling my name. Her voice got quieter as he walked her out, fading from desperate pleas to broken sobs. Then the door closed behind them, and suddenly she was just gone, removed from my life as completely as if she'd never existed. The moment that door clicked shut, Sophia stood up, walked over to the DJ stand, and took the microphone with this amazing composure that made me fall in love with her all over again. She addressed our guests with this perfect mix of grace and steel. She thanked everyone for coming, acknowledged that weddings can bring up complicated emotions for people, especially those struggling with their own lives, and suggested we all get back to celebrating. Because she'd just married the love of her life, and nothing was going to ruin this day we'd planned so carefully. The applause started slowly but built into this thunderous ovation. People actually standing up and clapping like they were at a concert. And just like that, the tension broke, and the party continued like nothing had happened. People started dancing again, the bar reopened, and life moved forward the way it always does. Later that night, after the reception ended and we were alone in our hotel room with our shoes kicked off and Sophia's hair finally let down, she told me she'd actually expected my ex to show up. She'd seen the social media stalking and the occasional drive-bys past my apartment in the weeks leading up to the wedding. She'd prepared herself mentally for some kind of confrontation. She said she wasn't threatened by it because she understood the difference between someone who loves you and someone who just hates losing. And Isabella had proven definitively which category she fell into with that desperate scene in front of everyone. We spent our honeymoon in Costa Rica, 2 full weeks of actually relaxing and being happy without looking over our shoulders or checking our phones every 5 minutes. When we got back, I completely blocked my ex on everything and made it clear through my lawyer that any further contact would result in a restraining order and possible harassment charges. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Charleston, South Carolina, about 3 hours away, trying to start over somewhere people didn't know her story or what she'd done. Honestly, I hoped she found some kind of peace eventually. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Sophia and I bought a house 6 months after the wedding. A real house with a yard and room to grow, and maybe eventually space for kids if we decided we wanted them. We started building the life I'd always imagined, but with someone who actually valued what I brought to the table instead of seeing me as temporary. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd sacrificed everything for someone who saw me as beneath her and ended up with someone who saw me as an equal partner worth fighting for. Sometimes the universe has a weird sense of humor about these things. Isabella kept my last name for almost 2 years after the divorce before finally changing it back. I found out later through a mutual acquaintance that she'd done it because she thought keeping it might leave the door open somehow. Like maybe I'd see it as a sign she still considered us connected and might change my mind. But that door had closed the moment she handed me those divorce papers at her graduation party. And the version of me who would have taken her back, who would have forgiven anything, who would have sacrificed himself again for her happiness, that version died in that garden while her friends watched through the window and laughed. The man I became after that, the one who said no, the one who fought back, the one who found Sophia and built something real and lasting, that's who I was always supposed to be. And my ex-wife's biggest mistake wasn't just underestimating me. It was giving me the push I needed to finally see my own worth and stop settling for someone who saw me as less than I was. What would you have done if you were in my shoes?